What's good, YouTube? Welcome back. Today it is LazyDaze Tubby, and you know what it is. We've got some Sabaton history up to bat for you guys today, and it is their episode 1648, the 30 Years' War. Episode 40. I'm really looking forward to finding out what Nindy Idell and the band members have for us today. They make amazing content as always, so if you haven't already, head over to their page, links in the description box down below. If you're enjoying my reactions, looking forward to future reactions, you know exactly what to do. Like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, but we are going to jump straight into this one.
1648 was the end of the 30 Years' War, but it was still a year of war.
I'm surprised. We've written a song about it.
After nearly 30 years of constant war, of plundered cities and millions of lives lost, the warring factions were finally willing to return to the negotiation table in late 1646. No matter which side or which religion, pretty much all duchies and estates were just sick of the war by now.
I think a lot of people would be after 30 years. If all you known is a generation of war, I think you'd get sick and tired of it as well.
Not only of all the misery and the economic collapse of vast stretches of the Holy Roman Empire, but the increasing futility and absurdity of the ceaseless, endless struggle. Many felt that it was long past the time that the war had...
Seeing pictures like that, like the hanging tree, it really just reminds me of the song in Hunger Games that Katniss Everdeen's dad used to sing to her, The Man in the Hanging Tree. It just really brings... Yeah, I don't know.
Achieved any meaningful political...
It's a really graphic image, that, to me.
...goals. And now it was just about the interests of individuals. Even the majority of the German Protestants and those allied with Sweden and France, who admittedly wanted the grip of the Habsburg emperors loosened, even they realized there was no real alternative to Habsburg rule if they wanted to keep the empire alive in any meaningful sense.
Okay.
All within the empire distrusted all foreign powers by now, after the devastation that had followed their armies marching time and again through the countryside, through their homes. So, both the Catholics and the Protestants wanted to settle things. In Westphalia, in the western part of the empire, the Catholics met at Münster and the Protestants at Osnabrück to debate possibilities of a fruitful peace. They sent each other envoys and letters, arguing about a common future within the empire. The Swedes were interested in northern Germany, with possessions that could safeguard the Swedish realm. Most of the northern German states had little choice but to pay tribute or to ally themselves with the Swedes, since the military might of the Emperor Ferdinand III was too weak to help them. By now, the military balance had clearly swung towards his enemies. The armies of Sweden and France now outnumbered the Habsburg forces in the south, while the emperor's alliance with Maximilian of Bavaria lay in tatters. The Swedish army was still the mightiest in Germany, bolstered by many German regiments with around 63,000 men at arms.
Very interesting.
The second powerful were the French, whose interests in the empire were far more complex than simply securing their own borders. They wanted the empire to bleed, but at the same time needed to preserve the Catholic influence in Central Europe. This way, they opportunistically fought with and against the Swedes, and with or against German duchies and contingents, depending on the strategic situation. Cardinal Mazarin, who represented the French in Westphalia, wanted to expand French territory, sure, but more importantly, felt the need to cut Habsburg ties to Spain, which had just signed a truce with the Netherlands after 80 years of war. The next few months were ones of constant debate. The big powers and the German cities, the estates, the dukes, the knights, they all had their demands and all wanted to have a say. They quarreled over jurisdiction rights, about compensation for war damages, about border lines on the map, who would pay for the troops to leave, who would pay for them to stay, who was rightfully owed money, which unfilled promises, threats, and boasts were still cause for concern. It was about reputation, about succession and hierarchy in the empire, about new alliances and old feuds, about persecution and amnesty. Radicals and moderates tried to find a solution in religious matters and the property of the church. Militarist Calvinists wanted to fight on to the end, while radical Catholics argued that a peace that enslaves souls is worse than a war that just kills the body. It was a nightmare of haggling and bickering about the future of Central Europe. And if we were to try and explain everything, we would be sitting here until the next Sabaton album comes out. But while everyone was debating...
Isn't that always the case with history? If you actually want me to go into further detail, then we'll be here forever. But, basically, here's the key points. Did you understand that? Do you think you were on the right page? Good. Let's try and move on to the next thing.
Debating and arguing, there was one man who was not the talkative kind, and instead relied upon the ways of the warlord. Swedish Field Marshal Carl Gustav Wrangel had taken command over the Swedish forces in Germany. Not wanting to sit twiddling his thumbs while peace was on the horizon, he set out against the southern coalition into Franconia. Wrangel's tactics were by now common practices. He inflicted terror throughout the countryside by razing whole villages, shooting churches to pieces, trampling crops and fruit trees into the dirt, and of course the usual excessive amount of murdering and raping among the common folk who were unfortunate enough to stand in the way of his army.
It was always the poor who suffered the most.
All over battle seas, there's a man who aims for more than he can reach. All over, on fire, all of Bohemia set ablaze. Stand alone.
Wrangel raided deeper into northern Bavaria, besieging and bombarding cities as he went. He plundered those he was strong enough to take, arguing that the more he could harm the Catholics, the weaker the imperial position would be at the negotiation table. Wrangel was obsessed with the booty and the treasure of the rich aristocracy and clerics, since that was how he and his officers made their living. Maximilian and Ferdinand were well aware of that, and in turn hoped to bolster their forces enough once more to drive a wedge into the Swedish forces descending on their territory. The Battle of Zusmarshausen, though, in May 1648, ended with a Swedish victory, as the Imperials and Bavarians only escaped total destruction with maybe a few thousand men left. And with the Empire badly defeated on the battlefield, the Swedes wanted one more shining victory. Under Field Marshal von Königsmarck, they set their sights on Prague, where the whole war had started 30 years ago. A cynic would not have missed the irony in it all. As the Swedish army passed the old battlefield of the White Mountain, where the first battle of the war had been fought, the final one would be fought nearby. Bohemia had long since been drained of troops, and Prague, though still a jewel in the empire, was only held by a small garrison, now under the command of Imperial Field Marshal von Colloredo. The story goes that a disgruntled imperial lieutenant colonel, who had lost his arm in service of the empire, showed the Swedes where the city's defensive works were the weakest, and 100 Swedes overpowered the defenders on the western side of the river Moldau and gained entry into the little town of Prague. The gates were opened for the main host, and a terrible plundering began. The old fortress Hradčany was taken, and the Swedes marauded through that half of the city. But city gates across the river were barred, and citizens and students there took up arms. In defiant firefights, they stopped the Swedish troops who came charging over the Charles Bridge. Colloredo's
Brave by the people of Prague.
garrison and Prague's people were determined to defend the old town. 3 times in this war, Prague had opened its gates to foreign invaders. 3 times they had suffered. Enough was enough.
The road to the city has been blocked, denied to enter the gates. No, they tried. When Prague was called to arms, they fought them on the bridge. The freedom was at stake.
Königsmarck soon realized that this was a tougher nut to crack than he had anticipated. But over the coming weeks, new Swedish contingents would arrive from Silesia and Saxony, drawn by the prospect of loot, while small imperial forces also snuck into the city to bolster the defenses. even as 3 Swedish armies simultaneously attacked, one led by the Crown Prince Carl Gustav himself, who had arrived to make his mark, the determined defensive line would not be broken.
They withstood 3 armies, like 3 detachments of the Swedish army. I think that's the best way to put it. That's insane.
From July to October, the siege dragged on. The situation for the defenders looked bleaker than ever. Colloredo knew that the inhabitants of Prague would face a terrible fate if the walls were taken. So every able man was expected to stand by the barricades, while women and children helped out wherever they could, putting out fires and caring for the wounded. It was all or nothing. Rich or poor, prince or pauper, they all fought together. They would suffer together if they failed.
That would bring such a united feeling to you and your people of that town as well.
On October 6th, the offensive was renewed. The Swedes were now building their own bridge over the Moldau, attacking the Galgen Gate with all their might. For 2 days, they bombed it until the gaps in it were large enough for the Swedish storm attack. Taking heavy casualties, the attackers eventually forced their way into the city. Only a desperate charge of Colloredo's reserve drove the Swedes out of the city once more. Then, on October 24th, 1648, the news spread like wildfire through the empire. Peace had been signed. The arguing, the debating in Westphalia had finally come to a conclusion. A 70-gun salute at Osnabrück proclaimed the end of the 30 Years' War. On the 25th, though, the Swedes attacked once more. If they ignored the peace treaty for just a few days more, they could go home as rich men. But the desperate and exhausted defenders of Prague would once again deny entry to their city.
No.
By the day's end,
Was it just because they were desperate?
800 Swedes lay dead before the breaches in walls and gates. It was not until November 5th, as a large imperial contingent appeared outside of Prague, that the frustrated Swedes began to retreat. The siege was broken. Prague had prevailed. In the peace treaties of Osnabrück and Münster that concluded the 30 Years' War, all factions had found a compromise that would guarantee a lasting peace for Central Europe. A new imperial constitution acknowledged the rights of the Protestants while keeping the Habsburg Emperor in power. Sweden and France profited as well from the weakness of the empire and extended their influence over Germany.
Okay.
There were smaller disagreements, of course, like who was the rightful owner of Alsace-Lorraine, and they remained unsolved. But this would surely be solved sometime soon, right? I mean, of course. It's not like it would be an issue for hundreds of years or anything. Wait, what? Yeah. Oh. Well, how about that? Okay.
How often in history is that true? We're like, yeah, we'll get this treaty done. Yeah. What about this, and this? Nah, that don't matter. We'll deal with that later. And then it's just an issue throughout like the next 100 years. Like I'm 90% sure this isn't the only situation that's happened in.
Well,
it's hard when you're thinking of things. It's hard to pull an exact reference point you're thinking about.
Oh, that is all in the future. For now, all that counted was the 30 years of war. 30 of the most brutal years our world has ever seen were over. Central Europe was at peace.
I still think I prefer the Swedish lyrics.
1648, end of the 30 Years' War.
Yes.
Why did you write a song about that and not 1618, the beginning of the 30 Years' War? Well, you wrote a lot of things about the 30 Years' War.
Oh, yes. However, that song is from the album Carolus Rex.
Yes.
And it covers basically the rise and fall of the Swedish Empire over 100 years. We felt the most interesting part of Sweden's involvement, or, well, mostly bad, was from the end of the war.
Well, here at 1648, Sweden is dominant in Central Europe, the most powerful army, more than the French even at this point.
Yep.
You know? Which is interesting because then we, as we saw in Lifetime of War or Livstid Krieg, that you just ran the country right into the ground with these endless wars.
Yeah, and I mean, it's we wanted to get a bit of diversity on the album as well. because for us being Swedish, singing about Swedish history, it's very easy that it becomes some sort of a glorification of, of the Swedish Empire. So we wanted both, well, the good and the bad, you know, both sides of the coin at least.
Well, this is also something to do with you because you're Czech.
I like that. I like that they done it in that way, because you could tell, like, I could tell in the Swedish version that they were the aggressors in that song. So they definitely portrayed that good, the both sides of the coins in that song.
And of course, the last battle of the war, you know, it ended where it started, you know, back in Bohemia with the Swedes attacking Prague and taking half of the city and not taking the other half of the city.
Yep.
You know,
stopped by a Jesuit professor, if I'm not mistaken.
Jesuit professor. Yeah. Now, when I lived in Prague in the early 90s, there was the Czechs would say that.
So I was thinking, I'm 90% sure Prague is the capital city of Czechoslovakia, right? Oh, I could have just made an absolute fool of myself on the internet, but you know, that's what we're here for.
The Swedes still had their crown jewels, and they really wanted the crown jewels back from Sweden. So they've been asking crown jewels back from Sweden. And my thinking was that if, let's say, I take something from you, right? Mm-hmm. If I own it for 350 years, I think it's mine by then, you know? Like when I left the States at the end of 1992, I left like my records with my then girlfriend, my record collection, because I didn't think I was going to be gone that long. But, you know, I'm not going to ask for it back now. They're hers now. They are no longer my records.
Oh, you're a bigger man than me. You're a bigger man than me.
I mean, it's been nearly...
Much bigger man than me as well.
No, they are no longer my records.
Oh, you're a bigger man than me. You're a bigger man than me.
I mean, it's been nearly
no
30
woman
years.
is still keeping my vinyls. You know?
Well, you can always get them again, and you know, the Czechs could always get new crown jewels. Sure, you got. In fact, I'll tell you what. You guys write in the comments. Do you think that after having the crown jewels for now it's 370 years, the Swedes should give them back to the Czechs, or do you think after owning something for 370 years, it's yours?
I mean, yeah.
Well, I'll see what they say.
That's a good point.
So who should have them, the Swedes or the Czechs? You guys get to choose.
It's a very interesting question.
Imagine that war, 30 years of war, and coming back full circle, coming back to Prague again.
Yeah, and I mean, especially, I think by the time Charles X made his way down there, he actually sped ahead in front of the, what do you call it, the news.
Yeah, because they signed the peace on what, I say October 24th, and on the 25th, he was still attacking Prague. He's like, no, we got a few more days before we can still pretend that the peace isn't signed, and we can make a lot of money if we break through. Yep. He had 3 armies by then he had. So then he was just still Prince Carl Gustaf. He hadn't become kungen.
Yeah, because his cousin hadn't, what do you call it?
Died? Oh, abdicated.
Abdicated.
Yeah,
yes,
that's true. Sorry.
Okay.
See, you know more Swedish history than I do.
Well, you know more American history than I do.
I'm pretty certain I do.
You know more history, period.
And I know more British colonial history than you do, as we discovered in Rock's Drift.
Yes.
Well, whoever you are, that's it for today for Sabaton History.
I really enjoyed that episode. Nindy Idol and the band always make great content, tell great stories. This was a great one. If you haven't already, head over to their page, links in the description box down below. If you're looking forward to my next Sabaton reaction, you know what to do. Like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and I will catch you in the next video.